"You're not family," she said, and held out her hand for the keys. My mother, in a silk suit, in front of the lawyer, my siblings, everyone. 23 years of work erased like it never happened. Then came the real gut punch. Legal affidavits, already prepared, full of lies. Estranged, they called me. Unfit. My hands were shaking, but I stayed seated, because I still had Dad's keychain in my pocket. And Dad always said, paper trails don't lie. I knew something they didn't. Something buried in the fine print, signed in ink. And I had exactly 90 days to prove it. Key moment. Extreme betrayal. Public humiliation. Ticking clock revenge plans set in motion. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I'm 45 years old. I manage the real estate company my father built from nothing, walking these quiet halls where dust motes dance in afternoon light, and filing cabinets hold 30 years of carefully kept contracts. Mother's polite smiles at Christmas dinner never quite reach her eyes, while my siblings chase quick profits instead of honest work. Dad taught me that integrity matters more than easy money. He'd tuck backup documents into property deeds and notarize everything twice, saying, "Paper trails don't lie, son." His passing left more than empty offices. It left questions in the air as thick as the silence. I run my thumb over his old brass keychain, feeling the weight of all he built. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, and somewhere a clock ticks forward. But let me start from the beginning. I settled into the leather chair, third from the left, in Blackwood and Associates' main conference room. The mahogany table stretched like a runway between me and Mother, who sat perfectly straight-backed near the head, her pearl necklace catching the morning light. You know, that moment when you can feel something's wrong but your brain won't let you process it yet? That's where I was. The executor, Jim Preston, who'd handled our family's affairs since I was in grade school, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The leather folder in front of him held what Dad had spent months preparing. All those late nights at his desk with papers spread out like battle plans. "Shall we begin?" Preston's voice carried that formal weight they teach in law school. Mother nodded, her silver hair catching the light. My brother Thomas smirked from her right, while my sister Catherine studied her manicure with manufactured disinterest. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to grow louder with each passing second. I remember when Dad first gave me his brass keychain. I was 22, fresh out of college, and he'd just shown me how to work the building's ancient boiler system. "Property management isn't glamorous," he'd said, "but it's honest work." The keys were still in my pocket now, pressing against my thigh as Preston began reading. The standard legal preamble washed over us. Being of sound mind and body, hereby declare all that familiar language. But then Preston's finger stopped moving down the page. His pause felt deliberate, practiced even. "Regarding the disposition of Mercer Properties, LLC and all associated holdings," he read, "I hereby explicitly disinherit Daniel James Mercer." The air vanished from my lungs. Maybe yours would have too. The fluorescent light suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. From any claim to ownership, management, or profit participation in the aforementioned business entities and properties. I waited for the unless or except, but it never came. My fingers found Dad's keychain, gripping it until the brass edges bit into my palm. "Mother," I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "You're not family." The words fell like ice cubes into an empty glass. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold, hard fact as far as she was concerned. Thomas didn't even try to hide his satisfaction now, and Catherine's lips curled into what might have been a smile if you didn't know better. Their faces looked like masks in a play I hadn't known we were performing. "Mr. Preston," I managed to keep my voice steady, "there must be some mistake. I've managed these properties for 20 years. Dad and I built—" "The clause is quite clear," Preston interrupted, adjusting those wire rims again. "Unless you can present evidence of error or undue influence, the will stands as written. 20 years of maintenance calls at midnight. 20 years of lease negotiations and property taxes and fixing broken pipes on Christmas Eve. All of it dismissed in a single paragraph of legal jargon." I looked around the table, searching for even a flicker of the family I thought I knew. But Mother's eyes held only calculation. Thomas was already thumbing through what looked like liquidation paperwork, and Catherine had pulled out her phone. The wall clock kept ticking, each sound like a hammer falling. Chairs scraped against carpet as people began to rise. Pens clicked closed. Papers shuffled into expensive leather portfolios. "We'll need the keys," Mother said, holding out her hand. Not asking, telling. I met her gaze then. Really met it. And what I saw wasn't grief or anger or even triumph. It was pure strategy. This wasn't a surprise to her. This room, this moment, this betrayal, it had all been choreographed long before we sat down. My fingers closed around Dad's keychain one more time as I forced myself to sit perfectly still. Every line in that will needed checking. Every signature, every date, every notary stamp. Dad had taught me that paper trails don't lie, and somewhere in all those documents was the truth. Mother's hand remained extended, waiting. I leaned forward, keeping my voice level. "I'd like to see the supporting documentation, Mr. Preston." "Of course." He shuffled through his leather portfolio, producing a stack of notarized affidavits. "These statements detail the circumstances leading to your father's decision." My mother's shoulders straightened, just a fraction. The same posture she'd always taken when she knew she had the upper hand at Bridge Club. The first affidavit hit me like a sucker punch. "Growing concerns about Daniel's commitment," I read aloud. "Frequent absences from critical meetings." My hands started to shake. "Questionable decision-making regarding property maintenance." "Remember that time Dad and I spent Christmas Eve 2019 replacing a burst pipe at the Madison Street complex? The tenants brought us hot coffee while we worked, steam rising in the cold basement. Dad's hands were steady even at midnight, teaching me the proper torque for each fitting." "These are lies," I said, flipping through page after page. "We handled everything together. Every lease, every, repair. Signed statements suggest otherwise." Preston cut in, adjusting those damn glasses again. "Multiple witnesses attested to growing estrangement in recent years." Thomas cleared his throat. "Danny, you were always off doing your own thing." Dad noticed. The casual use of my childhood nickname made my jaw clench. "Where are the property ledgers? The maintenance logs? The previous drafts of the will?" Preston's clerk, young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, stepped forward with folders so thin you could read through them. "This is what we have on file, sir." "That's impossible." Dad documented everything. Every dollar, every decision. I stopped, remembering his old saying, "Paper trails don't lie, son, but people sure do." "I'll need copies," I said, reaching for my phone. "And I'm calling Webster at the title company." "He can verify." "By all means," Mother said, that same cold smile in place. The phone rang 4 times before Webster's familiar drawl came through. "Daniel, been meaning to call you about your father. Terrible loss." "Thanks, Jim. Listen, I need confirmation on the property transfers from the last 5 years. Anything with both Dad's signature and mine." A pause. Keyboard clicking. "That's odd. I'm not finding those records." My stomach dropped. "Check under my name alone. Nothing there either. System shows gaps in the sequence numbers, like files were removed." He cleared his throat. "Sorry, Daniel. Maybe try the backup server?" I was already logging into our shared drive on my phone. Directories I'd accessed hundreds of times showed up empty or restricted. File names I knew by heart had been overwritten with new dates and permissions. Dad's voice echoed in my head. "Always keep copies in 3 places, son. Chain of custody matters more than people think." The fluorescent lights were giving me a headache now, but something else was building behind my eyes. Not just anger, clarity. They'd planned this, but they couldn't have erased everything. Not yet. I stepped out of the conference room, hitting speed dial for Mike Rodriguez, our property manager for the last decade. "Mike, it's Daniel. Got a minute? Heard about the will reading. You okay?" "Not really. Listen, I need access to your maintenance logs. The old ones, paper copies from before we went digital. Plus any rent rolls you've got filed away." "Jesus, Daniel. They're saying you're out completely?" "For now. Can you meet me tomorrow? Early, before the office opens? Dawn work for you? I've still got keys to the storage room." "Perfect. Thanks, Mike." Movement caught my eye as the elevator doors opened. Mother stepped out, her Chanel suit immaculate as always. The smile she gave me wasn't the one from church socials or charity galas. This was the smile of someone who thought the game was already won. But Dad taught me something else about property management. Problems hidden in the walls always surface eventually. You just have to know where to look. The next morning, I pulled into the empty parking lot just as the sun was starting to warm the brick facade of Mercer Properties. Mike's pickup was already there, its worn bumper catching the early light. Ever notice how buildings feel different at dawn? Like they're holding their breath, waiting to spill their secrets? The familiar squeak of the back door brought me straight to my teenage years, following Dad on early morning inspections. The hallway still smelled of lemon polish and old carpet. Some things never change, even when everything else does. Mike was waiting in the break room, 2 cups of gas station coffee steaming on the table. His face had that careful blank look people get when they're carrying bad news. "Thanks for meeting me this early," I said, dropping into the chair across from him. The HVAC system hummed to life overhead, right on schedule. "Daniel." Mike wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Before we dig into anything, there's something you need to know." He leaned forward, voice barely above the mechanical drone. "Your brother Thomas called yesterday. They're planning to liquidate big chunks of the portfolio." My coffee stopped halfway to my mouth. "How much?" "At least 6 properties. Maybe more." Mike pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes. "The Madison Street complex, both buildings on Pine, the warehouse district lots. Timeline, 3 months. They want it all wrapped by end of quarter." I grabbed my yellow legal pad and wrote the date at the top, then 90 days below it, circling it twice. The pen scratched against the paper like a timer starting. "You know that feeling when your whole world suddenly has a countdown? They'll erase everything," I said, more to myself than Mike. "Once those properties change hands, proving the old management structure, the maintenance history, the decision trails. That's why I pulled these." Mike stood and walked to the storage room. The fluorescent lights flickered on, illuminating rows of metal filing cabinets. "They haven't digitized everything yet. The older stuff's still here." We spent the next hour pulling folders. Rent rolls from before the cloud system. Vendor contracts with Dad's neat signature in the corners. Maintenance logs filled with my handwriting next to his, documenting every repair, every upgrade, every decision we made together. "Look at these dates," I said, spreading papers across the break room table. 2018, 2019, 2020, right through when they're claiming I was estranged. Serial numbers on all the notarized documents, timestamps, vendor confirmations. Mike picked up a work order from the Madison Street pipe burst. "I remember this one. Christmas Eve." "Yeah." I touched the paper, remembering Dad's hands guiding mine on the pipe wrench. "We need to document everything. Chain of custody has to be perfect." I started organizing files by date, property, and type. Each paper was a pixel in the picture I needed to build. But that 90 days kept pulsing in my head like a warning light. "Mike, I need you to be straight with me. Have they approached you about staying on after the liquidation?" He nodded slowly, offered a bonus to help with the transitions. "But Daniel, I've worked with you and your father for 10 years. I'll testify to whatever's true." "No," I said, closing a folder. "Don't put yourself in that position. Just don't let anyone know we met. And if anyone asks about these files, they're still being digitized." "System backup issues." He managed a thin smile. "I can buy you a few days at least." I checked my watch. 7:30. Court clerks would be at their desks by now. I had maybe 6 hours to get these documents recorded before the family's lawyers caught wind. "Here." Mike handed me a banker's box. "It's clean, never been used. Straight from Office Depot yesterday." We packed everything carefully, keeping the files in order. Each thump of paper into the box felt like ammunition being loaded. The halls were still quiet when I headed for the elevator, box secure under my arm. I hit the down button, mentally mapping the quickest route to the courthouse. The doors opened, and there was Mother, perfectly pressed in another designer suit. Her eyes went straight to the box. "Daniel." She adjusted her Hermes scarf, eyes cool as winter glass. "Working early, I see." "Mother." I shifted the box, keeping my grip steady. "We need to talk about this. I believe everything was made quite clear yesterday." She stepped from the elevator, blocking my path with practiced grace. "The will's terms are final. 23 years. My voice stayed level, though my jaw ached from clenching. "I've given this company 23 years. Dad and I built half these properties together. You really expect me to believe he wanted me written out? Business requires clarity, not sentiment." She brushed an invisible speck from her sleeve. "And clarity favors those who know when to act. Your father understood that, in the end." The fury that rose in my chest could have melted steel, but I forced it down. Dad's voice echoed in my head. "In real estate, son, procedure beats passion every time." "You're right about one thing," I said, setting the box down carefully. "It is time to act." I pulled out my phone and opened notes, typing as I spoke. "Forensic IT, drive images. Carl's off-site backups from Q4, tenant affidavits, Madison St. and Pine. Making lists won't change the outcome, Daniel." She tried to peer at my screen, but I angled it away. "Maybe not, but proper procedure might." I added, "Discovery request. Executor access to all drafts. You're only making this harder on yourself." Her tone carried that same dismissive note she'd used when I was 12 and caught her reading my diary. "Walk away now, while you still have some dignity." I ignored her, dialing the executor's office. Yes. Hello, Daniel Mercer. I need to schedule a complete discovery review of all will drafts and supporting documentation. Yes, I'll hold. Mother's perfectly lined lips tightened. The partners won't appreciate this disruption. The hold music played softly as I picked up my box. Then they shouldn't have started it. I left her by the elevators and headed for Dad's office. The door was unlocked. First warning sign. Inside, the shelves stood half empty, dust outlining spaces where binders and folders had sat just days ago. The filing cabinet drawers rolled too easily, stripped of their usual weight. Someone had moved fast. No, someone had moved earlier. This wasn't a reaction to yesterday's reading. This was planned. I locked the door and sat at Dad's desk. The leather chair still smelled like his aftershave. But the calendar was clear. The inbox empty. I picked up my phone again and set a countdown. 89 days. The brass keychain in my pocket pressed against my leg. Pulled it out, letting the metal warm in my palm while I thought. Dad had taught me that real estate lived in the details. Every document, every date, every signature mattered. Somewhere in this maze of paperwork and hard drives, something bulletproof was waiting. I just had to find it. Looking at the empty shelves, I added to my list. Check building permits, original signatures, pull bank records, wire transfers and approvals, review all notary stamps, verify dates. The office felt different in the dark. Quieter, more honest maybe. I reached for the light switch, and that's when I heard it. The soft click of a drawer sliding shut somewhere behind me. You ever have one of those mornings where everything goes sideways before you've even had your coffee? That was me at 7 a.m., staring at my phone like it was speaking Martian. We regret to inform you that your storage request has been denied due to updated access protocols. I read the email twice, my stomach dropping. The records vendor, guys I'd worked with for years, were suddenly acting like I was a stranger trying to rob their vault. I set my travel mug down harder than needed, watching coffee slosh against the lid. The brass keychain clinked against my desk as I fired up my computer, hoping the banking records would give me something solid to work with. Instead, my inbox held another punch to the gut. Dear Mr. Mercer, regarding your inquiry into historical authorizations, please be advised that updated signature cards filed within the past quarter supersede all previous arrangements. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I remembered sitting with Dad at that same bank, watching him sign those original cards with the Mont Blanc pen I'd given him for Christmas. Now some nameless clerk was telling me those signatures meant nothing. Like hell they don't, I muttered, punching in the title company's number. The hold music played for 10 minutes before a woman with a customer service voice took my call. I'm sorry, sir, but those transfer confirmations have been moved to off-site storage pending internal review. We can't provide access without, she paused, probably reading from a script, without proper authorization from current management. I hung up before she could finish. You know that feeling when the walls start closing in? That's what hit me as I headed for Dad's office. The halls felt longer, darker somehow, even with morning sun streaming through the windows. The door wasn't just unlocked this time. It was standing open. Inside, the room looked like one of those crime scene photos where everything's been swept clean. The boxes I'd seen yesterday? Gone. The desk drawers hung open, empty, except for scattered paper clips and a dried-out Bic pen that probably predated my birth. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone again. Jim Baker had been Dad's golfing buddy for 20 years. If anyone would understand what was happening. Danny, look. Jim's voice carried that careful tone people use with unstable relatives. Maybe it's better to let this go. For your health, you know. These things can eat you up. Inside, I tried Mark Peterson next. We'd coached Little League together. Our kids were friends. Sometimes families just... He cleared his throat awkwardly. Sometimes it's best to move on. Start fresh. The silence after I hung up felt heavier than all those missing boxes combined. It hit me then. The circle wasn't just tightening, it was already closed. Everyone who might have helped had either been turned or scared off. I pulled a whiteboard from the conference room and started building a timeline. Dates in black. Dad's passing, the will reading, each denial and roadblock. Names in blue. Bankers, clerks, former friends now avoiding my calls. Red for everything that had vanished. Files, records, signatures, trust. The affidavit template took shape on my laptop. I, Daniel Mercer, being of sound mind. I documented every detail I could remember. Every conversation, every empty drawer, and missing box. Maybe it wouldn't hold up in court, but at least there'd be a record of what really happened. My watch showed 10:47 a.m. 88 days left on the countdown, and I could almost hear those hours ticking away. Every filing window, every legal deadline was shrinking while I sat there trying to rebuild what had been erased. Standing in Dad's doorway, I could almost see the trail of footprints leading out, carrying away 23 years of work, one box at a time. The morning sun caught dust motes floating where filing cabinets used to stand, making them look like stars in some empty galaxy. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I reached for it, not even sure who was left to call. That's when I heard the footsteps coming down the hall. Too steady to be a janitor, too purposeful to ignore. The law office smelled like leather and ambition. You know that mix of expensive furniture and billable hours? I sat across from Patricia Chen, watching her manicured nails tap numbers into a calculator. Each click felt like another nail in my financial coffin. Initial retainer would be $15,000, she said, sliding a contract across her mahogany desk. My hourly rate is $450. Paralegal time $275. She paused, studying my expression. Given the complexity and the timeline pressure, you should expect to refresh the retainer within 3 to 4 weeks. My throat tightened. The funeral had already drained most of my emergency fund. Dad would have called that ironic. Him always pre. The sun wasn't even up when I pulled into the gravel lot behind Building 23C. You probably wouldn't notice this place unless you were looking for it. Just another beige storage annex tucked between a defunct print shop and an auto parts warehouse. But Carl was already there, leaning against his pickup, thermos in hand. Your father bought this parcel in '89, he said, pushing off the truck. Listed it under a shell company name. Most folks thought it was just overflow storage for the main office. I remembered those early days, watching Dad work his way through town, one modest deal at a time. The scent of coffee and morning dew brought back summers spent riding shotgun in his station wagon. Property logs spread across my lap while he pointed out potential investments. Carl led me around to a metal side door, working 2 different keys before it clicked open. Inside, industrial shelving stretched into darkness. He flicked a switch, and fluorescent tubes sputtered to life overhead. Richard was methodical, Carl said, moving to a cabinet in the back corner. Said a man should always keep an ace in his pocket. But only the right people should know which pocket. The cabinet looked ordinary enough, but when Carl swung it open, I felt my chest tighten. Dozens of rolled deeds, thick binders, and manila envelopes filled the shelves, each one labeled in Dad's precise handwriting. That slight leftward slant I'd know anywhere. Start with this one, Carl said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. My hands weren't quite steady as I laid it on a dusty work table. The pages crackled with age, but the writing was clear. Property numbers, dates, and detailed notes in the margins. I stopped at an entry from 8 years back. Hold up, I said, leaning closer. This shows a 15% transfer on the Riverside complex. To me? Carl nodded. Keep reading. Each page revealed more. Dad had been quietly transferring minority shares in key properties to me for years. Not just Riverside, the downtown office park, the mini storage facilities, even that strip mall out by the highway. All documented with his characteristic thoroughness. Dates, percentages, cross-references to notarized letters stored in those manila envelopes. Jesus, I muttered, pulling out my phone to photograph everything. This blows their whole estrangement narrative to hell. That's why they're rushing to liquidate, Carl said. Can't sell what's partly yours, not without proper notification and a shareholder vote. I grabbed a legal pad and started logging everything. Document dates, parcel numbers, where each transfer connected to which notarized letter. The systematic betrayal I'd felt since the will reading began to crack. This wasn't just evidence. It was Dad's real plan, hidden in plain sight. We need to get these verified, I said, already pulling up my attorney's number. Independent notary, executor present as witness. Everything by the EAS book. Smart, Carl agreed. Your father would do it the same way. We spent the next hour sorting the envelopes into 3 stacks. Hard proof of transfers, supporting documentation, and contextual records. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the area code matched my lawyer's firm. 86 days, I said, checking my countdown app before reaching for the phone. Let's see them try to liquidate their way around this. Carl relocked the cabinet while I answered the call, both of us knowing we'd just changed the game entirely. I remembered Dad's voice from years ago. Son, in real estate, the truth is always in the paperwork. Not the stories people tell. The actual, signed paperwork. Looking at those neat stacks of documents, I finally understood exactly what he'd meant. My phone buzzed in that storage room, and I'll never forget the acid tone that came through the speaker. Mother's lead. Attorney, Harrison Vale. Didn't even bother with hello. Mr. Mercer, I'm giving you one chance to surrender any purported evidence before we pursue sanctions for fabrication of business records. Ever have one of those moments where you can actually feel your blood pressure spike? My free hand clenched into a fist, but I kept my voice steady. Everything we found is properly documented and dated, Mr. Vale. I'm happy to save it for your counsel, he cut in. You'll be receiving formal notice within the hour. I strongly suggest you consider the consequences of persisting with these creative interpretations. The line went dead before I could respond. I looked at Carl, who'd caught enough of the exchange to read the situation. They're scared, he said simply. Wouldn't waste ammunition on a dead target. Sure enough, my phone pinged 15 minutes later with the promised notice, all caps and legal threats, demanding immediate cessation of fraudulent activities and threatening Rule 11 sanctions that could bury me in fines. You know that feeling when someone's trying to bulldoze you with fancy words? Yeah, it was like that. I forwarded everything to my attorney and called the record service I used back when Dad and I managed properties together. The woman there still remembered me. Need certified copies, I told her. Triple sets, notarized, then straight to secure storage. Nobody touches them without dual authorization, just like your father used to require, she said. And I had to smile. Even now, Dad's habits were keeping me steady. 2 days later, I'm sitting in a pre-hearing conference room, trying not to let the air conditioning freeze my sweat-damp shirt. Mother's side had brought the full circus. 3 attorneys, a forensic accountant, even a handwriting expert. Made my single lawyer look like David facing Goliath. Vale stood up, straightening his tie. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of a disgruntled family member attempting to leverage fabricated documents for personal gain. Mr. Mercer's estrangement from his father is well documented. These sudden discoveries conveniently surface only after the will reading. I felt heat crawl up my neck, watching them spin it, making me sound like some desperate con artist, hit harder than I expected. The financial statements in my briefcase didn't help, showing my accounts bleeding dry from legal fees. The judge peered over her glasses. Mr. Mercer's counsel may proceed with discovery, but be advised. If these allegations of fabrication prove true, this court will not look kindly on such behavior. After we adjourned, I couldn't make myself leave the courthouse. Just sat on a bench outside, watching cars slide by in the afternoon heat. My countdown app blinked at me. 85 days. The number felt like a weight pushing me underwater. For the first time since this whole mess started, I seriously considered walking away. Let them have it all. Stop the financial bleeding. Save what little I had left. Maybe this was what giving up felt like. Not some dramatic moment. Just quiet defeat on a courthouse bench. The concrete shifted as someone sat down beside me. Carl. His face set in that weathered calm I'd come to rely on. Your father knew this might happen, he said, not looking at me. His hand moved, sliding a thin envelope into my palm. That's why he filed something where vultures never look. The envelope was sealed with wax, old school like Dad always preferred for his most important documents. I broke just enough of the seal to peek inside, and my breath caught. There, clear as day, was a registry stamp I'd never seen before. Foreign letters, official seals, but the date was unmistakable. Just 6 months before Dad died. I looked at Carl, questions racing through my mind, but he just nodded once and stood up. Some shoes, he said quietly. Leave tracks that can't be erased. Ever pull an all-nighter that felt like your whole life hung on getting every detail exactly right? That was me, camped out at a 24-hour notary office with enough coffee to float a battleship. Again from the top, I said, spreading the documents across the conference table. The notary, Ms. Chen, nodded patiently. She'd been with us since 10 p.m., and it was pushing 3 a.m. now. Registry number cross-referenced, she confirmed, tapping her pen against each matching digit. Apostille seals intact and verified against the central database. Her computer screen glowed with the Foreign Registry's website, the one Dad had chosen for its triple verification system. On speakerphone, the executor's voice crackled. Witness signatures match our records for the delegation that traveled last spring. Mr. Mercer Sr. was thorough in his documentation. You could say that again. Dad had everything witnessed, countersigned, and time-stamped. Classic him, really. Takes me back to watching him triple-check lease agreements, teaching me that patience beats problems every time. The translation service had 2 people working in shifts, making sure every word matched exactly. The successor, the bailiff's all rise, snapped through the courtroom like a starting gun. My legs felt wooden as I stood, but I forced my spine straight. You learn to fake steady when you've spent years handling tenant complaints and contractor disputes. Judge Morrison settled into her chair, glasses perched low on her nose as she studied a stack of documents. The silence stretched until my shirt collar felt 2 sizes too small. Finally, she looked up, her expression carved from granite. Having reviewed the submitted materials, she began. This court finds sufficient cause for immediate concern regarding the authenticity of several affidavits central to the estrangement claim. My mother's lawyer, Thompson, I think his name was, shifted in his expensive suit. The kind of subtle tell that screams louder than words if you've spent enough time reading people across negotiating tables. Specifically, Judge Morrison continued, the notarized ledgers and overseas trust addendum directly contradict the timeline and circumstances alleged in these affidavits. She lifted a paper, reading. The claim that Richard Mercer expressed, quote, grave doubts about his son's commitment to the business is particularly troubling given the documented transfer of minority shares dated 3 years prior. I pulled out my phone, opening the Notes app to record every word. Dad taught me that trick. Never trust memory alone when details matter. The familiar tap of keys helped steady my hands. This court is referring these documents to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud charges. The judge's words fell like hammer blows. The severity of deliberately misleading this court cannot be overstated. Tell you something? In all those years managing properties, I'd seen plenty of people realize they'd lost everything. That same shocked pallor was creeping across Thompson's face right now. Your Honor, he started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. Save it for the prosecutor, Counselor. I'm ordering all relevant documents preserved and surrendered to the DA's office by close of business today. My phone buzzed, a news alert. I angled it under the table. Breaking, fraud investigation launched in Mercer estate battle. That didn't take long. Local reporters always did love a good scandal, especially involving prominent families. I glanced at Carl beside me, caught that slight tightening of his jaw. He'd seen enough business deals go south to know what this meant. The liquidation scheme my siblings had counted on was dead in the water. No title company would touch those properties now, not with fraud allegations in play. We'll recess for 1 hour, Judge Morrison announced. When we reconvene, I want to hear arguments specifically addressing the validity of the overseas trust addendum. She fixed both legal teams with a stern look. I suggest you use this time wisely. The gallery rustled as everyone stood. I took my time gathering my papers, watching my mother's team huddled in urgent whispers. Through the courtroom's windows, I could see reporters gathering on the courthouse steps, microphones ready. Remember those property inspections where you just know there's water damage behind a wall, but you have to wait for the plumber to confirm it? That's what this felt like. Watching a facade crack, knowing the real damage was about to show. My phone buzzed again. A text from our office manager. News vans outside the building. Your brother's crisis manager just walked in. I thought about those ledgers hidden away all these years. Dad's quiet insurance policy against exactly this kind of power play. Even now, he was still teaching me about preparation and patience. The bailiff called time. As we filed back in, I caught sight of Carl's reflection in the door's glass panel. That slight nod of his that said more than words ever could. Whatever came next, the truth was finally breaking through. Looking at the judge's bench, I remembered all those lease signings where Dad insisted on reading every line, no matter how late it got. Details matter, son, he'd say. They're what separate plans from promises. The bailiff's voice rang out again. All rise. I pushed through the heavy courthouse doors into a wall of August heat and flashing cameras. The steps were packed with local news crews, their microphones thrust forward like accusing fingers. You know that moment when you can feel every eye on you, waiting for one wrong word? This was it. Mr. Mercer, what's your response to the fraud allegations? Did your mother orchestrate this scheme? Will criminal charges be filed? I adjusted my tie, remembering how Dad handled tough questions during zoning meetings. Measured tone, stick to facts. Let truth do the heavy lifting. The court is reviewing all documents thoroughly, I said. I trust they'll separate truth from rumor. Beyond that, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on ongoing proceedings. Channel 4's Sarah Chen, I recognized her from coverage of our downtown renovation project last year, pressed closer. Your mother's known for her church volunteer work and charity fundraising. How do you reconcile that public image with these forgery accusations? Movement caught my eye. Mother was exiting through a side door, her normally perfect posture rigid as marble. For a second, our eyes met across the crowd. I'd seen that same look when she caught me playing with Dad's tools as a kid. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule by touching what wasn't meant for me. My phone buzzed. Another email from Old Town Plaza's tenant association. Relieved to hear. Liquidation's on hold. Your father always treated us fair. Hoping that continues. I pulled out my yellow pad, jotting 84 days in the margin. The clock hadn't stopped, not until everything was signed and settled. Dad's voice echoed in my head. Contracts aren't done till the ink's dry and filed. Mr. Mercer, your statement on the court's decision? I straightened my shoulders, picturing Dad at his desk, reviewing every lease line by line. My father built this company on integrity and trust, I said. He believed in doing things right, not just doing them fast. I respect the court's process and believe justice will prevail through proper channels. My siblings emerged next, hustling toward their cars with phones pressed to ears, probably calling damage control experts, though it might be too late. Social media was already lighting up. Someone had posted Christmas photos from 3 years ago, showing me and Dad fixing the office heating system while everyone else opened presents. Hard to sell estrangement when timestamps tell a different story. Another buzz. A maintenance supervisor had shared a log of emergency calls I'd answered over the years. Midnight pipe bursts, weekend security alarms, holiday HVAC failures. Each entry stamped, dated, and signed. Funny how paper trails outlast family fiction. The brass keychain pressed against my palm through my pocket. Same weight it had carried for 20 years of property rounds. I remembered the day Dad handed it to me, after I'd learned every lock and system in our first building. Keys are trust-made metal, he'd said. Don't give them to anyone who hasn't earned them. One final question, Mr. Mercer. A reporter I didn't recognize waved from the edge of the crowd. They tried to erase your connection to the company. What would you say to others facing similar betrayals? The question hit harder than expected. Around me, cameras leaned in, red lights blinking. Mother's car pulled away in the distance, her silhouette small behind tinted windows. 2 decades of properties, tenants, and promises hung in the balance. I wrapped my fingers tighter around Dad's keychain, feeling each ridge and groove press into my skin. The metal was warm now, like it had been that first day. 2 weeks later, I walked back through those heavy courthouse doors, this time for the final hearing. The gallery was packed. Seems everyone wanted to see how this family drama would end. Can't blame them. When pillars of the community fall, the crash tends to draw a crowd. I settled into the familiar wooden chair beside my attorney, spreading my documents with the same care Dad used to show his contracts. Carl Donovan slipped into the row behind me, his presence solid as a foundation wall. All rise! Judge Harrison entered, her robes rustling as she took her seat. She didn't waste time with preliminaries. After thorough review of the Overseas Trust Addendum, including verification from the Foreign Registry and independent authentication of signatures, this court recognizes the document as legitimate and binding. My chest loosened for the first time in months. You ever have one of those moments when victory feels almost too quiet? Like you expected trumpets, but got a whisper instead? Furthermore, she continued, the succession clause clearly names Daniel Mercer as the designated steward of all company holdings. This appointment is hereby confirmed, effective immediately. I glanced at Mother's table. Her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, but her face might as well have been carved from stone. Kind of reminded me of the way she'd look when Dad would override her at board meetings, like she was swallowing glass but couldn't show it. Regarding the matter of fraudulent affidavits, Judge Harrison's tone sharpened. The clerk will schedule restitution hearings to run concurrent with the prosecutor's investigation. All parties named in those documents are ordered to remain available for questioning. The gallery stirred. 3 reporters slipped out, probably racing to break the update. I could already see the headlines spinning. Family's fraud scheme backfires. Church leader faces criminal probe. Son vindicated in will contest. Mother's attorney rose. Your Honor, we accept the court's ruling on the addendum and will cooperate fully with any investigation. His voice carried the hollow ring of surrender. Amazing how quick "you're not family" can turn into "we accept the ruling" when signatures prove stronger than spite. The judge nodded. Mr. Mercer, do you wish to make a statement before we conclude? I stood, smoothing my tie the way Dad taught me. Only that I'm grateful for the court's diligence in uncovering the truth. The company will continue serving its tenants and honoring its contracts, just as my father intended. Very well. She lifted her gavel. This court orders an immediate halt to any planned liquidation of assets. All holdings will remain intact pending final disposition of the criminal investigation. We're adjourned. The sharp crack of wood on wood echoed through the chamber. Around me, chairs scraped, and voices rose, but I stayed still, letting it sink in. 84 days had seemed like such a tight window when this started. Now the clock had stopped with time to spare. I found Carl in the hallway afterward, away from the press crush. The old sun-creased face broke into a rare smile. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. "You fought clean." "Couldn't have done it without those breadcrumbs you showed me," I replied. "Or your testimony about the overseas filing." He shook his head. Richard knew what he was doing. He just needed someone steady enough to follow the trail. The main doors opened ahead, spilling autumn light across the marble floor. I could see cameras gathering on the steps, hungry for the final word on a story that had gripped 3 counties for months. But before I faced them, I pulled Dad's brass keychain from my pocket. The metal had warmed against my leg through the hearing. I ran my thumb over the familiar ridges, remembering all the doors these keys had opened, all the properties they'd protected. A janitor passed with his own ring jingling, and suddenly I was 12. Again, following Dad through empty halls as he explained how every lock had its purpose. Carl touched my shoulder. "They're waiting for you out there." I nodded, closing my fingers around the keychain until I could feel each key's teeth press into my palm. Ready as I'll ever be. We pushed through the doors together. Microphones lifted like a forest of metal stems. The October air carried the sharp, sweet scent of fresh-cut grass from the courthouse lawn, mixing with the old stone smell that always reminded me of Dad's first office. The questions flew fast. "Mr. Mercer, your response to the ruling? What happens to your mother now? Will you press charges?" I held up Dad's keychain, letting sunlight catch the brass. The metal felt warm and right against my skin as I delivered the line that would define not just this moment, but everything that led to it. "Family is proven by loyalty, not blood."